Welcome to the Powerful Panels podcast. This is Kristin Arnold, and I am on a quest to make all panel discussions lively and informative. Today, I am so happy to have Liz Weber, who is strategist extraordinaire. She works at the C-suite level, business owners, board members, helping them get strategic insights and being able to execute on those insights. And so I thank you very much today for joining us, Liz, because you moderated a panel at the National Speakers Association just a few weeks ago. And it was a really fascinating panel on business models and different business models. And 45 minutes went absolutely crazy. And the feedback that you got was incredible. So I thought that we would kind of spend, 20 minutes or so, just kind of unpacking how it occurred, what prompted this panel, kind of what you did in the planning of it and the execution, what worked, what surprised you, what maybe you would have done differently, and any final comments. So that's kind of what we have teed up for our podcast. Sound good?
Sounds good. Thanks, Kristin.
Awesome. So Liz, tell us, how did this panel come about?
So I was asked to help kind of come up with some of the breakout session topics for, as you said, the National Speakers Association, who are professional speakers. And as a professional speaker, many people see us on the main stage giving a keynote speech, but there are other aspects to the business, writing books, coaching, consulting, lots of other things. And I don't know about you, Kristin, but I can say for myself, there are other revenue streams that I have tried in my 30-something years of being business, in addition to speaking and consulting, that I threw money at and it didn't go well. So we wanted to put together a panel of professional speakers who had multiple streams of business, who had identified what those alternative streams could be, that actually were working for them, and the lessons they learned along the way that helped them become successful while this additional business stream complemented their brand as a professional speaker.
Awesome. And so it was a topic that really resonated.
Mm-hmm.
So you said a topic, which is various business models, revenue streams. The premise of that panel was to show that various revenue streams can be profitable.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
And so your title of the program was, what did you title it?
It was finding and identifying complementary revenue streams. That was it.
Pretty simple, not very sexy, but pretty to the point. And the room was packed.
The room was packed. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you find your panelists?
So we identified some individuals that we knew had various successful complementary revenue streams. Some had a certification program where they licensed other professional consultants, coaches, trainers on their communication model and provided training for that. We had a gentleman who is very successful in contracting with the federal government, something that a lot of speakers had never thought about before. It was something too intimidating for them. We had a woman on the panel who works through local community colleges in their workforce development area to provide training to local businesses. And again, something that I knew most other speakers probably were not familiar with, but it was something that I also, by the way, had told this woman about years ago, and I had background experience with it as well. So we had two speakers talk on certification programs and the differences between them that most people in the room would be familiar with. And then we had these two other revenue streams that we knew people in the room were probably not familiar with. And the intent was to find some of those hidden nuggets in the revenue streams that they were already familiar with, things that they may not have already thought about. And then in the other new areas, what should they think through before they just followed that bright, shiny star and started throwing money and time at a potential new revenue stream?
And the other thing that I will point out is that the panel was visually diverse.
Yes, that was intentional.
Not a manel. So you had to kind of reach out and figure out, okay, so some of these people that I don't normally know, reach out to. So kudos on that one.
Yeah.
So you've got your panelists. What kind of prep did you give the panelists? How did they come prepared?
So what happened is initially I reached out to each one of them with generally an email first, just asking, here's the premise. We know you're going to be there because we already know you're registered for the conference. So easy fit there. Here's the premise for the panel discussion. Here's what I would be interested in you sharing and going a little bit deeper with. Would you be open to participating? And if so, could we speak ahead of time to kind of run through the basics of how this would go? And I am happy to say that after chasing a couple people down a couple times, everybody fully agreed. And I kept it really pretty simple because, as you alluded to, Kristin, here, the breakout session was only 45 minutes, which if you have a single presenter, that's a small window of time. But when you have 4 people plus a moderator, that's a tight window to fit some information in. So each of them actually was concerned about, but we only have 45 minutes, but we only have 45 minutes. So I had to be very,
Love to talk.
yes, yeah, and they can. They could easily fill 45 minutes individually. And so I had to be very focused with myself first and with them of what I believed each of them could contribute that would have the maximum impact in the time that they would each have. So it was really targeted to each of them.
So when you followed up with a conversation, was it individual or did you have a group call? And did you share kind of the format, the structure that you were going to use?
We tried to do a group call, but schedules wouldn't allow. So I had one call where I had 2 individuals, and then I had individual calls with the remaining 2. And what was really very helpful was with one of the presenters, Sam Silverstein, who I know you know very well. In talking through the breakout session with Sam, he's actually the one that had the idea of coming up with a checklist of questions that the participants could use as a takeaway from the session. But they would be questions that they could ask themselves about a potential revenue stream. And it was a lot of the questions that Sam had asked himself, I've asked himself over the years, you've probably asked yourself, and the other panelists probably asked themselves as well. And once Sam suggested that, for me, that really crystallized how I was going to ask the questions of the panelists. And also, interestingly enough, how I was going to seat them in what order on the stage so that I could run the questions and kind of run the conversation accordingly. Sam's idea of coming up with a checklist, a takeaway checklist, just really clicked for me and helped me get structure for the whole.
Right. Let's just kind of be clear that at the end of the panel, there was a QR code that then directed the participants to go get this checklist, which is a really handy kind of guide to say, have you thought it through before just knee-jerk reaction and going, oh, shiny penny, shiny penny. I think certification sounds like a good idea. You get halfway through it and you go, well, that kind of sucks.
Right.
So I love the fact that you collaborated in creating a great value add takeaway. And that, you had these conversations. So tell us a little bit about how you structured this, knowing that you have only 45 minutes, you have panelists, 4 different business models that need to be explained to some detail.
Right.
And you have speakers who like to speak.
Right. So given all of that, I thought it would be really helpful if I made it as clear for the panelists as possible what to say and when, and without scripting it for them, but also without constricting them. And so what I did was, when I spoke with each of them, but then also I researched each of them a little bit so I could just prepare their intros. What I simply did in introducing each of them was I went to their website and I kind of looked for what I call their tagline or their grab line. What are they known for? So that in that 15-word soundbite that I would share with the audience would go, okay, I know why she's sitting on the stage. So anything that she has to say, I can tag it back to, she's an expert in panel facilitation or panel moderation. So I knew I could not open up the panelists to say, Kristin, so please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your business model, or 49 minutes would have been gone right away. So in doing that, I had a 15-word intro for each person. And what I did with each of the panelists then is I simply said, hey, Kristin, here's how I'm planning on introducing you from the stage. I'm then going to turn it to you for 1 minute. And I want you then to say, great, yep. And my business model that I'll be talking with you about is X. And that's all you get to say to introduce yourself, because then we're going to do the other 3 panelists, and then we're going to start asking the questions. And that, I think, really helped keep it very succinct for the audience, but also it allowed each of the panelists to, in their own words, describe their business model, but keep it very focused and very succinct.
And they all followed your direction.
They did.
That is a huge plus.
Yeah.
So you've got kind of that introduction, beginning piece, and then you went into moderator curated questions,
Mhm.
and then we had a few questions from the audience towards the end.
Correct.
So how did you develop that list of questions and sequence them?
Well, if you flash back to this checklist of questions that I referenced earlier, that was the takeaway at the end of the panel discussion. The questions in that checklist were basically a run of questions that I had developed, and then I ran by the panelists beforehand, of chronologically things that would make sense to me the next time I'm considering taking on another revenue stream. What is the sequence of questions I should be asking myself before I jump in and follow that shiny penny? And so that really helped. And because of that, basically, when I had my questions that I identified for the panelist, I simply kind of collapsed a couple of those questions from the checklist in one. So the first question offhand, I don't remember what the first question was, but it may have been, first off, okay, Kristin, so in looking at panel moderation, why was that for you a smart move to complement your keynote speaking? And just kind of an open-ended question as to what was the thought behind that? Why did you think that was a smart move for you? To just, again, number one, learn from them and have the audience members hear what triggered that thought in her mind, but also then and I'm very happy the panelists did this, to very candidly go, either it just seemed like a really logical next step, or Liz told me I should do it because I'd be good at it. Because sometimes there is no exact path. Sometimes things just happen. And I wanted the audience to hear that, because I knew one of the panelists, like I said, I'm the one that told her about this opportunity. And so, you just never know where an idea can come from.
Your flow of questions is that you were very targeted about who you were going to ask the question to,
Mhm.
and it wasn't the same question to everyone.
Mhm.
So you might have started with I think it was Tony,
Yeah.
with that question about what prompted you to do that, but then you reframe that question in a different way to send it to Lisa, for example, or
Right.
Pam. So I think that the way that you characterize things moved us along so that we could get that self-discovery about, understanding what the business model is, how did they trip over it, was it intentional or not, and then how does it execute in real time, right? So what's the implication for the audience? And I think the panelists, I don't know what you did in the planning of it, but the panelists were always kind of saying, this is how I did it, but you can, how would you do that in different business models?
Right. And I think that was key. And I appreciated that with each of the panelists, because not any one of them, as you just alluded to, said, this is the way it has to be done. Each of them were very candid, at least with me. I don't remember if they said it in front of the audience, of, I'm still tweaking this, it's working, I'm making money at it, but I'm still tweaking this. I'm still fixing it and figuring it out every day. And one of the panelists, Phil, he was very candid in front of the group. He said, this is way harder than I thought. And this has taken way more of my time than I had ever anticipated. And I was very glad with their candor, because it was helpful to hear. It was helpful for me to go, oh, it's not just me.
Thank you for encouraging that kind of conversation. So what, like, that's a piece that you really liked about it. What else did you really like about this panel discussion? And then I'm going to ask you the other side of the coin. What would you have done differently?
So what I liked about it, and I don't want to sound egotistical when I say this, but it was so fun for me. It was easy for, quote unquote, easy for me. And I was thinking about this, after you reached out and asked if we could have this conversation. And I was asking myself, why was it easy for me, and why do you do what you do, Kristin? And I think one of the things that helped me in this situation, and probably is an asset for you, is that you and I are both used to rolling up our sleeves and working in a room with executives, with leaders, having challenging conversations at times, and we have to control that room, whether it's strategic planning or a business strategy or whatever it is. We have X amount of time to get a client from point A to point J on that particular day. And we know what we need to do while we allow them to have conversations along the way. And so I think that background is very helpful. And so facilitating that panel was, for me, an eye-opening experience, going, wow, this was good. This was fun. I enjoyed it. The panelists felt safe. They apparently had a good time, and it was easy for them within the time constraints that we had. So that was a nice takeaway. That was a fun takeaway. The
Oh,
other
maybe you
side,
might want to do it.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The other side was, there wasn't a negative side to it, but it was interesting, as you point out in your books, not to be patronizing, but there is upfront work. And it's one of these things where I actually reflected on this 2 weeks ago. I was working with a client, and we were in Michigan, and we were helping them basically stress test their business continuity plan. And I was doing a piece of the day, and then their internal people were really focusing on this particular topic. And they had an individual who is a manager that they're trying to help step up to the next level. And it was her job to debrief the 100+ managers in the room on the exercise. And it was interesting because, and I don't mean to critique or criticize, but it's one of these things where she's been a number of my sessions, and moderating, facilitating, debriefing, when it's done well, it looks so easy. Like anything, like, well, who couldn't do that? You just get up there and you ask a couple questions. And this poor woman, after about the second question, I realized she had no plan, and she's got no plan B, C, or D, because no one's answering the questions she's asking, because the questions are too voluminous, that it's not giving anyone a sense of what the answer could or should be. And so I leaned across the table to her boss and I said, would you like me to, wait a little bit, and then just like, oh, I need to say something. And she goes, oh gosh, please. And, I jumped up to kind of to help. And at the end, this manager came over to me. She goes, I'm so glad you did that, because she goes, you can just tie all these pieces together. And again, I don't mean to be braggadocious, but there's more that goes into this than just showing up on stage and asking a couple of questions, or asking the same question to everybody. And so that was surprising to me. You need to have a strategy going into this as to what do you want the audience experience to be, and what are the questions. For me, the thing was, what questions, if I were sitting in that audience, what are the questions I want to have answered? Because I'm going to be frustrated if I walk out of here and I don't get a chance to ask that question. And so I really wanted to try to make sure I took their perspective into concern.
And you always know when you've got a good panel discussion is when people stick around after, wanting to talk more, either with each other or directly asking a question to a panelist. And there was a lot of robust conversation at the end. So I really want to thank you, Liz, for sharing your expertise with us. If there's one thing that you would recommend any of the panel moderators or panelists who are listening into this podcast to keep in mind, something that you learned from this experience, what would it be?
It's your job to control that room. And it's your job in the time constraints you have to take the audience from point A to point Z and control whatever happens in that room and help them have a great experience. I think that's a newfound appreciation I have for panel moderation.
Oh, and that control, especially because you started out with no microphones.
Yeah, that was fun too. Yeah.
That didn't work. I remember. So,
Yeah.
and you handled that nice and smooth, just went, well, okay, until they figure it out, let's just project our voice. It was a room that had over 100 people in it. And all the panelists just went, yep, we'll do that. So
Yeah.
again, masterful facilitation, moderation of a panel discussion. Thank you so much for joining us, Liz. For the rest of you, continue to listen to our podcast, subscribe. We'd love to see you here at thepowerfulpanels.com.